Good afternoon and welcome to today's program titled The Family is the Patient and the Patient is the Family, the Residential Family Restructuring Workshop Recovery Model. I'm Gary Enos, editor of Addiction Professional Magazine. Today's program has been sponsored by Caron Treatment Centers. Thank you to our sponsor and to you and our audience for giving us your time and attention. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping details. Each window on your screen can be moved by clicking and dragging, or enlarged and minimized by clicking the icons in the top right corner of each window. Please use the Q&A area below the slides to submit a question at any time during today's presentation. If you cannot see this area, simply click the red Q&A button. To download a copy of today's slides, please click the link in the Resources area in the bottom left of your screen. If you have any technical issues during today's program, please click the yellow Help button to troubleshoot the issue. For those seeking CE credit, certificates will be distributed via the green CE certificate button at the end of today's program, so please wait for further instructions at the conclusion of today's event. You can also tweet during today's presentation via the Twitter widget by clicking on the blue Twitter icon at the bottom of your screen. Simply click the Post and Authorize buttons to log in to your Twitter account and begin sharing at the hashtag #APFamilyRecovery. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Bradley Sordi. Bradley Sordi is a family therapist at Caron Renaissance, where he plays a role in facilitating daily group sessions with current patients, family workshops, and the Residential Family Restructuring Workshop. Prior to his work at Renaissance, Brad served as a graduate intern at the FAU Counseling Center in Boca Raton, Florida, and with Palm Beach County Court Administration. He holds a Master's of Social Work from Florida Atlantic University, a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Rice University, and a Bachelor of Science in Legal Studies from Kaplan University. He has been a featured speaker at conferences around the country on topics ranging from family recovery to young adult addiction. Thank you, Brad, for taking the time to speak with us today, and with that, the audience is yours.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar talking about residential family restructuring and also the process of family recovery and the role of family in addiction treatment and recovery. Just to kind of give a quick overview of what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the role of the family in treatment and also the role of family in recovery, identifying the needs specifically of the family during that process, and then for the second half of our conversation today, looking at the model of treatment of residential family restructuring and how the needs of the family are addressed through that model. So the training objectives for today, we are going to be working to recognize and describe the family system and assess each need of the individuals in the system, identify the dynamics that contribute to the dysfunction, including sources of emotional dependence, family of origin issues, and the secondary and tertiary gains of remaining in the dependent relationships. We're also going to articulate the benefits of family recovery to the sustainable change of the system. So to start off, some core concepts. One of the things that you'll hear me mention throughout the course of this presentation today is the idea that the family is the patient and the patient is the family. For all the professionals attending today who've had some experience working with individuals and families who have been dealing with someone with an addiction, the impact that individual's behavior has had on the family is something that can't be understated. And the impact that the family system's responses have had on either reinforcing the continuation of the addictive behaviors or starting to implement some healthy boundaries makes it very clear that for successful treatment, the entire family system needs to be looked at. You know, we believe in a multi-systemic approach that really looks to reduce the externalization of blame for the sources of the patient's or the family member's behavior, and really put the responsibility of the individual to take responsibility for the choices that they make by challenging their self-deception and the enabling dynamics, helping family members start to identify the selfish gain in continuing to enable or problem solve or rescue by managing their own emotional needs, and with the objective of moving towards a healthy dynamic of social interdependence where every member of the system is taking appropriate adult responsibility for their emotions and the things that happen in their life. So to kind of get things started off here, we wanted to start with a quick poll question. So true or false, the family or individual family members are often responsible for the patient's addiction. So if you could take a couple of seconds and answer that question, we'll see what the poll results say. Okay. So the majority, 90% or 89.5% of folks reported that is false, that the family or individual family members are not often responsible for the patient's addiction. And so that's a very key piece of what we're going to be talking about early on here in the presentation. So one of the things that we want to first spend some time talking about is what model of treatment we would be approaching the family from while we're looking at this program. When we're looking in the context of how to work with the families and also with patients, it's the process of looking at the Axis 1 and Axis 2 diagnoses that the patient or the family members may be presenting with. Also in the context of that, looking at how the generational themes that are present within the family system, also predating a lot of the addictive behaviors that we're seeing, may serve to reinforce some of the unhealthy behavior patterns that the patients are presenting with. Now, one of the most important pieces to understand is that while looking at these generational pieces as well as the underlying personality and mental health diagnoses may play a role in inhibiting the recovery, they do not directly cause the patient's addiction. So we're going to have another poll here quickly. Family involvement in the treatment process should begin when? During the initial assessment phase, once the patient has come to treatment, only in the context of continuing care planning, or when there is a crisis. So take a couple of seconds to poll your responses, and then we'll see what the consensus is. So the majority of folks indicated that it's during the initial assessment phase, and this is absolutely correct. During the very beginning, before a patient even presents in treatment, it is important that whoever is the staff member who is working with that particular patient or prospective patient and the family system is doing a thorough job of not only assessing the needs of the family, but also involving all of the members of the family system, whether it's mother and father, spouse, siblings, significant others, and whoever might be directly involved in either being impacted by the patient's addictive behaviors or have been also responsible for how they've been responding to them. The family is the patient and the patient is the family. You know, this phrase is mentioned quite a few times again in this presentation because it's something that from the very beginning during that assessment phase, when the family is first being engaged, it's very important that it is reinforced to the family system. Coming in the door, most families are not going to intuitively recognize the fact that their needs are an important part of the recovery process and the treatment process. As a result of that, it's essential that the clinicians, starting from the admissions process throughout the continuum of care, are continuing to really reinforce to the family system that they are part of the treatment process, that they are identified as being the patient as well, and that their needs, emotional needs, their needs for treatment, parallel the process for the patient. Another saying that I think is very helpful and putting all this into context is that when the family changes, the patient changes. I mean, too many times have we all seen the patient coming in for treatment and leaving against medical advice or returning back to the home environment where the dynamics within the family system really have not changed. The family continues to manage their emotions through enabling or rescuing. The patient continues to manipulate using the same emotional hooks that they've used in the past. And what we see is that all of the same behaviors start to come back out. Now, where we see a huge difference is when all of a sudden the family system really embraces this concept that the family is the patient and the patient is the family. And the family system starts to recognize that their enabling behavior, their problem-solving behavior, their behavior in terms of how they've been responding to the patient has served to really manage some of their own anxieties or manage their own emotions or rooted in some of their own family of origin experiences. And when the family starts to develop the boundaries, the healthy boundaries, so that they're no longer taking responsibility for that behavior, you see that puts a lot more responsibility on the individual, the addict who is in treatment, to start to manage things more appropriately on their own. One of the things that I will often tell families when I'm working with them is that some of the greatest predictors of the success of the family system really is how much work that the family is willing to do in terms of getting involved with 12-step recovery programs for themselves, involvement in on-site work, involvement with individual or couples counseling so that they have the resources to manage any discomfort that comes up throughout the course of the process. When the patient starts to see this, when the addict who is in treatment starts to see this and experience those boundaries firsthand, it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on them to find other ways to get their needs met as opposed to resorting back to the behaviors that they had been in the past. Family recovery, a couple of notes on what are some key pieces of family recovery and the involvement in the addiction treatment process. You know, one of the biggest misconceptions that families will operate under is what we had talked about in that first poll item, and as evidenced by the responses, the majority of the individuals attending today are aware of this. That it is a misconception that the family caused the patient's addiction. Now, what needs to really be reinforced with the family member is to help them understand that the development of the patient's addiction is not a product of external factors. It's not a product of the way that the family has responded or family of origin experiences, but that their responses going forward can either serve to impede with the recovery process or be supportive to it. Most family members have probably not adopted this same understanding that 90% of the folks watching today actually have. Many family members present with a tremendous amount of guilt and shame over feeling that they or their actions may have caused the patient's addiction. And a lot of addicts have played on this vulnerability and reinforced that dependence by specifically externalizing blame and getting the family member to really believe that the reason that they are an addict is that individual's fault. So it's the role of the therapist to help that family member or all the family members really understand that it is not their responsibility and to help support them in having the boundaries to be no longer taking responsibility for that part of the process. The other piece is family recovery is about each individual healing. And you will find, and I have found, that it is often very challenging to get the family system to start to focus on their own healing. That there is a tendency, and the focus has been on the patient for so long that there's a tendency to want to stay focused on, well, what does that person need? How do we fix that person? But there's so much collateral emotional damage that occurs to moms and dads and siblings and spouses and everyone in the extended family as a result of all the energy that's getting expended to try to save this other person. Really helping the family understand that their emotional well-being, their therapy, their support groups, and their work is as much a priority as the addict in treatments is a very important piece that needs to be reinforced from the very beginning. Again, going back to the piece about families not being responsible for the patient's addiction, the part where the family system has a level of responsibility is how their responses are going to either be contributing to the patient's recovery or how their responses might be contributing to the patient's relapse. And so by raising a level of awareness for the family system, by identifying sources of emotional dependence, things from their family of origin, pieces that or emotional hooks that the patient has been able to use that often draw upon those feelings of shame or guilt or responsibility, is a key part of not only the assessment process but the ongoing treatment of that family member. As even an intellectual understanding of these pieces oftentimes doesn't translate into the ability to emotionally implement appropriate boundaries. As a result of that, you'll often see that as you work with a family and they start to understand how their responses have been in a way to manage their own anxiety and have been contributing to the dysfunction in the family system, put them in a situation where all of a sudden the anxiety is going up, and you'll see that families go back to doing things the way that they're most comfortable. Another piece that's very important here is really recognizing how parallel family recovery is to the patient's recovery. That every step of the way, beginning with assessment all the way through continuing care, there are expectations for the family to be engaging in support systems, treatment work, insight-generating treatment work, very much the same way that the patient in treatment is expected to do so. The effects on the family system really touch all different areas of that individual's life. It affects relationships. It affects occupational performance. It affects marriages. It affects the relationship between parents and siblings. And so being able to help the family system identify that part of their work is to start to heal these relationships and to have the boundaries to be able to not allow the focus to be on the addict's behavior anymore is a key piece of the process. And again, treatment for the family system parallels the patients. From the treatment assignments that families are expected to complete, where they're looking at their own family of origin, looking to see how maybe something from their family system or the dynamics in their family system make it harder for them to be objective in behaviors that they're seeing with the patient. So I'll give you kind of a classic example of that is part of the feelings of guilt and shame associated with the family thinking that they caused the addiction. Oftentimes we'll look back and you'll see that mom and dad both grew up in an alcoholic system. So there's this sense that my genes made him an addict, or something that I did made him an addict. And so when there's that source of guilt or that source of responsibility from something that the family member experienced growing up, it can make it so they are less inclined to hold that patient accountable or raise the expectations for them, for if there's oftentimes that feeling that, well, it was my fault, or if I had done something different, and since it turned out this way, I'm responsible for managing pieces of it. The other piece that's always very important as well is really needing to challenge the distortions around the dynamics in the family. And so as you can see, what ends up getting recreated from one family system to the next is because mom or dad grew up in a family system where mom was blaming dad, or very critical of dad for causing problems in the family system, well, then you're going to see that the translation into the next generation is going to be a reluctance maybe to be honest or objective or hold the addict accountable because of a fear that would then be perceived to be that same critical behavior that individual experienced. So there needs to be a level of insight generating work done around really getting to the root of what were the dynamics in the patient's parents, or in the other collateral sources, family systems that sometimes go back many generations, so that we can see how those experiences are contributing to problems in the current family system, and that some of those dynamics end up getting reenacted. So as the family system is being engaged throughout the treatment process, there are several expectations, again, that parallel the work that the patient in treatment is going to be doing. Successful treatment requires that the family member engages in contact with the patient's primary therapist and family therapist each week. Recommendations for participation in whatever level of family services are going to be required to appropriately address the needs of that family system. Sometimes that may mean that the family member or parts of the family system or the whole family system might need to engage face-to-face more than once, be it coming for a family program such as the workshop, coming down for an extended period of time through a residential stay in the restructuring program. In addition to that, families are going to be asked to complete treatment work, and treatment work that's going to be aimed at helping them identify the struggles that they are having in setting boundaries with the patient, the places where their anxiety manifests, the things that they have a hard time tolerating, and also really starting to take a look at, well, what are some of the other issues in the family that have been overshadowed by the focus on the addict? Have there been issues within the marriage that are going to start to be revealed? Is there going to be issues with another child, one of the siblings of the patient that seems to have been overshadowed by the chaos that's ensued because of the addiction? And then starting to come up with treatment goals oriented towards starting to address those issues. Recommendations for the individual family members will really span across the spectrum, from individual couples therapy to group psychotherapy, pretty much across the board. The involvement in support groups, especially 12-step oriented self-help groups, is a must for family members. What we start to help the family members identify is look to see how the rescuing and the enabling has become a way for them to manage their anxiety and their discomfort. And when you start to work with the family member to have them challenge that tendency to want to problem solve or bail their son or daughter out of jail or put them in another halfway house because they didn't pay their rent, is you need to help them identify, well, what's going to be the way that you are going to manage that anxiety when it comes up? Because by and large, there are going to be many different opportunities where the patient's going to try to go back to their dependent relationship with the family, and the family's going to need to really reinforce some healthy, firm boundaries with that individual. So by reaching out to a support group of other recovering parents or other recovering siblings, by having a couples therapist or an individual therapist, by being connected with other alumni families who have been through the treatment program, that individual is starting to have the same resources that the patient is expected to develop for themselves to be able to manage the emotions that come up, not only through the course of treatment, but also as they start to experience life on life's terms. You know, the assessment part for the family is very important as well. And again, like we mentioned before, it begins with admissions. From the very beginning, when a patient or a family member or a referent contacts the agency, it's important that the collateral sources, the people who have been impacted, the people who have been involved in the addict's life are involved. Speaking with the individuals who have referred that individual and family to treatment can often provide a tremendous amount of information about what's really going on with the family system. Once the family, and even prior to the family coming in the door, a brief assessment of the psychosocial history for that family member should be done, and oftentimes even prior to admission, a recommendation that a family member or a family system as a whole might be needed to come in for a face-to-face interaction and come in for residential restructuring can be made prior to the patient even getting here, based on that history, based on the information that can be ascertained from the referral sources and from the admissions process. Once the patient is here, the very first piece of treatment work that the family is expected to be working on is to really be completing a very in-depth family psychosocial history, as well as another questionnaire oriented at identifying how they've been impacted by the addict's behavior, but also how they've responded to it, and how they've identified the addict in the context of our clinical philosophy and what their characterological development has looked like. What are the dynamics in the family, and how is the addict taking advantage of that? Where is there an incongruency between where the individual should be in their adult life right now and the juvenile and adolescent behaviors that they have been seeing? And then obviously the other piece of that is really to make sure that whoever was involved outside of just the immediate family, whether it's grandparents and significant others, be a part of that as well. When it comes to engaging the families, multiple levels of recommendations can be made based on the clinical needs of the individual. Many families would be expected to participate in the multi-day family program. However, oftentimes other clinical needs are identified that requires family members to be here for other services, whether it's to come in for one clinical day or coming in for an extended stay in working through the residential family restructuring program. Part of all of these interventions is to work with the family members to identify, well, what are the goals for this individual family member and for the family system as a whole, whether it has to do with addressing boundaries and expectations in relationships within the family, or the emotional impact of the addict's behavior on the family system, all the way towards what are the relationship goals and academic and vocational goals of the patient, and what role does the family system play in that. So, the next piece that I want to talk a little bit about here, now that we have the background of the involvement of the family in the recovery and treatment process, is to really talk about the treatment of the family system in an immersion setting. So when we're talking about residential family restructuring, it's focused on treating the parallel dynamics of family recovery in as real a situation as you can have, where that family system and the patient have a lot of support and structure around them to really start to look at the dynamics that haven't been working. This process really, again, goes from the very beginning, from the assessment phase, all the way up through bringing the family in for the intervention of living here and working through the clinical program while they are here, where we start to challenge the thinking that contributes to the perpetuation of the dysfunction, start to implement behavioral changes so that the family system starts to do things differently, and then connecting that family system with the resources so that whatever changes have started here can then be continued when they get back to their home environment. And really, one of the most important pieces of all of this is the continuing care component. Just as any patient who is leaving any sort of a treatment setting is going to have their own set of continuing care recommendations, the family needs to have that as well. That the family needs to be directed to have the resources available to them at home, be connected with therapists, be connected with other family members, so that whatever emotions start to come up as they continue with their recovery can be managed in a healthy and appropriate way. So the immersion is really the first part of the process, and the recommendations for residential family restructuring, the minimum recommended span of time is 2 weeks. The family or the part of the family who is participating comes in. They live on property with the patient in a separate apartment from the rest of the patient community. However, they are still considered to be a part of the patient community. The family is engaged in a full week of clinical programming for the times that they are here. Full 2 weeks, full 3 weeks, whatever the recommended period of time happens to be. That means that coming in the door, families will have been provided with treatment planning, treatment assignments, goals as to what they're going to be working on while they're here. They're going to be participating in the treatment program, the 3 90-minute clinical groups per day. They'll be working on an individual basis and on a family basis with the family therapist and with the patient's primary therapist. They will be expected to utilize the weekly spending allowance and the expectations regarding housekeeping that all of the other patients would be adhering to, with some small exceptions, understanding that family members taking 2 weeks out of their life would need to have oftentimes access to their email, their phone, and things of that nature so that they can manage their lives. But by and large, the expectation is that it's, the clinical times are the priority, and that the family members are expected to be there for all parts of the clinical program. The expectation is also that the family members are here for themselves. And as many times as that may be articulated to family members prior to coming in the door, you'll often see that there tends to be a belief that when families first get here that they're here for their patient. And that's something that from the very beginning needs to be addressed, that they are here for themselves, that the treatment assignments that they will often have been provided are really oriented towards addressing their underlying issues and their history and their emotional dependence with the patient. So challenging distortions and seeking resolution. This really relates to the work that's going to begin on the phones, working with the families, through the family programs. But once the family really is here, we can start to see how all of these distorted beliefs about the patient, about the addiction, about how the families are managing their anxiety starts to manifest right in front of us. Families will be on the phone, they'll be home, they'll know that they're having 2 phone calls a week, and then if they don't get a phone call in the middle of the night that there's a crisis, then they're able to sleep well. But all of a sudden, put them in the room with the addict, and you start to see all the excuse-making come back out. You see mom or dad going right back to doing what they've always done and picking up after them, managing their guilt and shame over the patient's lack of progress in treatment by doing things for them. And all of these classic beliefs start to come out, and we can really start to challenge them, because just by putting that family system together in a clinical setting, all of this stuff starts to come back out. You'll put mom and dad and the patient in an apartment, and all of a sudden mom and dad are getting split because of the alliance between the patient and dad, and they're keeping secrets from mom. Same thing that would happen in the home, only the difference now is that it's happening in a clinical setting where there's 60, 70 other patients who are understanding how this process works. There's a treatment team, an interdisciplinary treatment team. There's round-the-clock counselors, assistants who are able to observe and also challenge these behaviors as they're coming out, and really helping the family understand that, look, this is the process that's going to play out back at home. This is what was going to play out if this individual left and came back to your house. You're not even able to demonstrate the appropriate boundaries right now while they're in treatment. And it really puts the responsibility on the family members to recognize the fact that, yes, the family recovery is a responsibility for each family member to manage for themselves. That they need to be getting to their meetings, and that they need to be getting to their to their support groups so that they can have healthier ways of managing the discomfort that comes up. So behavioral change. As we start to really work through these distortions and start to help the family members see that the addiction is not their fault, help the family members understand how they have secondary gains and other pieces that contribute to their continued desire to enable and rescue. Then you can start to see that even as the insight goes up, there are these reinforcing dynamics that make it harder for them to break it. And so when I talk about secondary gains and tertiary gains, it's not just simply a matter of the patient being dependent on mom and dad, that there are oftentimes pieces that make it very reinforcing. So you have the patient who's dependent on mom and dad, but they're also invested in having mom and dad do things for them. Mom and dad may be invested in keeping the patient dependent on them because it allows them to have control. It allows them to feel like they have a way to manage any of the discomfort that's coming up for them. Well, if I can fix his problem, if I at least have some semblance of control, then I'm going to feel okay. Sometimes these dynamics can be even more reinforced through the fact that having an addict who is creating a lot of disruption in the family system, that can really that can shift the focus away from a lot of the other problems. So maybe mom and dad's marriage really isn't doing all that well, but when they can be united in staying focused on the chaos that's coming out as a result of the individual's addictive behaviors, then they don't have to look at the problems that are going on in the family system. So it really has to be assessed early on, well, what are these other pieces of the dependent dynamic that are keeping these family members oftentimes very invested in not changing? And many times the awareness of this is something that is not conscious to the family members, and so a lot of work needs to be done to really challenge their motivations, to help them have a better awareness as to what's really driving the behavior and why they keep recreating these situations. So the behavioral changes that we'll start to see are boundaries and the increase in expectations, a shift towards more adult relationships, and ways that the family system and the patient are starting to regulate their emotions in healthier ways. Because the family system is going to be in a setting where not only they're in the clinical setting during the day, but back at the residence and during the weekends as well, where there's less structure, there's going to be opportunities throughout the course of the program for the family system to start to demonstrate appropriate accountability. The patient's not going to do something in the apartment, or they're going to violate a boundary. Well, is that family member going to keep that secret and continue doing what they've done before? Or are they going to utilize the tools that they've started to develop to challenge that individual and bring it up in group and start to demonstrate healthy accountability? Are they going to start to put in place healthy and appropriate natural consequences? Or are they going to continue to do what they've done before and sweep it under the rug and pretend it's not happening? If that does end up becoming an issue, it's happening in a setting where there is a system of accountability surrounding the family, so that those issues can be addressed. Really looking to start to see that the family system is moving towards an interdependent relationship with one another, where there is a give and take, where there is healthy communication, where there is assertiveness and boundaries are not only being articulated, but they're also being respected, and that the family members are each learning to and demonstrating that they are regulating themselves emotionally, not through another individual in the family system, but by developing their own internal controls. So now we wanted to have another poll here real quickly. So as we're starting to talk about the continuing care piece, recommendations may be made for family members to engage in which of the following: 12-step family support meetings, including Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, and Families Anonymous; individual, couple, or group psychotherapy; alumni networks, sober social supports, and aftercare programs, or all of the above. So if you could take a couple seconds. All right, so just about everybody got it, all of the above. And I know that we had mentioned it before, but really it's that big a piece of the family recovery, is that all of these things are things that could be potentially put on the table for the family to engage in for their recovery. You know, and again, these are all pieces that throughout the continuum of care are going to be put on the table for the family system to engage in, whether it's something that we're starting to build upon from the very beginning, recommendations from the get-go to start to attend meetings, but also to really build towards, by the time the family system is nearing the end of treatment, well, what is the plan going to look like going forward? Do they have those primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of support through other recovering family members, through support groups, through professional counseling? And do they have a plan as to not only what their support system is going to look like, but also their insight into, well, how have things changed? You know, every family system, as they are transitioning out of care at the end of treatment, is expected to complete a continuing care plan that speaks just to those things. It asks them what their support system looks like. It asks them who their professional help is, whether it's group psychotherapy, individual or couples, what their support groups look like, whether it's Nar-Anon, Al-Anon, or Families Anonymous. But in addition to that, questions about their relapse process. What would financial relapse look like to me? What are warning signs that I am returning back to old behaviors with my patient? What are things that the people around me would identify first as a return back to old behaviors? And the expectation is that once the family completes this, they give a copy back to the family therapist, but that they also keep a copy of it for themselves to hold themselves accountable, so that they're able to remember that at the conclusion of treatment, these are the behaviors that I identified as being problematic for my recovery. So, you know, once more to kind of bring all this back around full circle, you know, the parallel treatment process for the treatment of the family, it begins with a very thorough admissions and assessment process. That from the very beginning, the moment that a family and a patient have contacted the agency, it is the responsibility of the agency to start to assess what are the needs of this family, who are the key players, what might be some of the significant dynamics and pieces, family of origin pieces that are contributing to problems, and how have each of the individual family members been affected. Treatment planning, it needs to be something, again, that is done in parallel. Just as the patient, as soon as they arrive here in treatment, is going to be receiving treatment plans on how to address their issues, every family member who is coming into our program receives a family treatment plan outlining all of the things that we've been speaking about this afternoon. Everything from the psychosocial history all the way up through the family involvement in family programs and their support system and the continuing care process, with the continued reinforcement that the treatment process is parallel and that the family is the patient and the patient is the family. Outside support network, same thing. 12-step family-oriented groups psychotherapy parallels the process for the patient. And the other piece of it being connecting family members with alumni supports. You know, we have the benefit of having a strong relationship with our alumni family base, as well as our local patient family base, our patient alumni base. And just as every patient is provided an aftercare buddy when they arrive here in treatment as a first sober support for them to get connected with, all of the families coming in are provided one as well. Usually someone who is local and oftentimes someone with similar experiences, so that they have the beginnings of that support system with somebody who has already been through the process that they are about to embark on. Aftercare services is another very important piece. Again, families are expected to continue to work on their recovery, and as are patients. Just as an aftercare program is provided for the patients, we've started to look at putting in place support groups for alumni families. Caron as a whole has many support groups around up and down the East Coast to support families in their ongoing recovery, as well as staying connected with their families throughout the treatment process. Really, kind of that brings everything to the conclusion there. And even though just today we were really focusing on talking about the services offered at Caron Renaissance. Caron Renaissance is just one of the facilities in the Caron Renaissance continuum of care. So if, as anyone was observing and participating in our talk today, has any specific questions or wants any kind of direction, we have locations up and down the East Coast, with our main office being in Pennsylvania, as well as regional offices in Philadelphia and New York, Boston, Washington, and Bermuda. So, that brings me kind of to the conclusion here. So I want to thank everyone for participating today, and we will have some time now to do a couple of question and answer. So,
Brad, thank you very much for a very informative presentation, and this has inspired a number of questions from our audience already. Terrific questions, and we'll get through as many of them as we can leading up to the top of the hour here. Also want to remind our audience that you can still use the Q&A widget below the slides to submit a question, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. Brad, question came in regarding consent. This person asked, does patient consent ever become a problem in involving families?
That's a great question. So at times, yes, it does. And so one of the expectations from the very beginning is that to be able to treat a patient, we really need to be able to work with the family as a whole. So that at times we will have someone who will come in who is resistant to signing a release for a particular family member, and so we will have to address that clinically with the individual. But that at times, if there is a lack of willingness on the part of the patient to allow us to involve the family system, that may serve as a barrier to being able to treat that individual at this time. So yes, it does present as a problem. However, very often we're able to work with that individual so that we're able to work with the family. So it's a very good point, because to be able to work with the family, we need to be able to speak with them.
And then, Brad, we sort of had the reverse type question from a few of our participants today. This person asks, and this is reflective of some of the other questions, do you accept clients even if their families are not willing to come in for the 2-week family piece? So sort of talk a little bit about what happens when the family members are reluctant or refusing even maybe to participate.
Yeah, that's another good question, and it kind of I want to just kind of clarify another piece to that. So that not every family system coming in is going to be recommended to come in for the length of the 2-week restructuring program. And if I know that we had a somewhat of a shorter window than I'm used to kind of go through all these details, but for the families where that is recommended, it depends. Sometimes the recommendation may be because of what's going on with the patient or what's going on with the family, that the expectation would be that this individual does need to be here for a period of time for us to be able to address that. Now, many families will only be recommended to engage in the 3-day family workshop. Really, everything is going to be treated on a case-by-case basis. That sometimes we need to work with a family to see, well, why are they not willing to come in at this time? What are the motivations behind that? Sometimes it's a matter of working with the patient to get the patient to advocate for themselves and say, look, I think that you need to come in here to do this work. Sometimes the family is they're worried. They have anxiety about coming in because they're seeing that some of the issues that they maybe have spent years and years and years not dealing with are going to be talked about. But by and large, we will make clinical recommendations, and that there may be some situations where the clinical recommendation is that if you're not willing to engage in the 3-day workshop, let's say, or if the family member is not willing to engage in attending support groups, then they may not be engaging on the clinical download, that they may be continuing to work with the family therapist and working on their emotions and anxieties that might come up, but that until they've demonstrated a willingness to do the family component as well, that we wouldn't deem that it's appropriate for them to be getting information about the patient. And so intervening on that part and really putting the responsibility on the family member.
Very good. Toward the early part of your presentation, when you were talking about the responsibility issue, we did have a couple of questions that came in, and this is one that's sort of reflective of that. This person asks, how is it that the family is not responsible when it's the family's core belief system where most of our clients learned their self-defeating behaviors? How would you sort of respond to that type of inquiry?
Sure. Well, the way that we would look at that is that the patient's addiction is something that has developed separately from all of that. Now, oftentimes most of the time, the characterological pieces, the dependence, the entitlement, the avoidance, predates any of the alcohol or drug use. It predates any of the actual addictive behaviors, and we can usually trace that back very early on in the patient's development. And as a result of that, the decision to engage in the alcohol or drug use is something that begins and ends with the patient and their choice to actually do that and to continue to do that. The family system has a role in the recovery process, but that it doesn't actually have a role in the creation of the actual addiction developing on its own.
Very good. We had some questions regarding assessment, and this one is typical. What type of instrument do you use for the family assessment? Is there anything you could say, Brad, about the tools that are out there that are available for this kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, the two tools that we use from the very beginning that are very helpful is are the two questionnaires that we have the family members start working on from the very beginning. I mean, then the first one is a very thorough family psychosocial history that really has them starting to take a look at not only the current family system, but also the family system that they grew up in, the parenting styles, the relationships with their siblings, and whatever knowledge they have of the family system that their parents came from. In addition to that, the other questionnaire focuses on the context of our clinical philosophy and how they have experienced the patient and the patient's development over the course of time, how they've responded to it, and how they have been impacted by it. And one of the things that you'll see is as you kind of put mom and dad and the siblings questionnaires all together, you'll see that there are these differences and that everyone in the family has a different interpretation of things and how each of them have responded. And so when you're able to start to put those things in context and come up with a formulation of what the family dynamic is, you're able to start to find what are the needs of each of the individual family members. And so referrals and recommendations, whether it's to outside support systems or whether it's to actually coming in to do the work on site, are all going to be determined based on that.
Excellent. And Brad, we had a few questions that I guess I would call the $64,000 question, which is related to insurance and cost. Are these services generally covered by insurance? People were concerned about, our families going to have access to this kind of work based on insurance coverage or cost. Can you talk to that for a minute?
Sure. Yeah. Insurance is not something that would would typically cover this as it's a workshop, so that would be something that usually is not going to be a factor. Now, the one piece that does come when it comes to the cost is that since the family member is coming in and basically getting the same clinical services that they would as a patient, they're coming in at the rate that treatment would be for a patient. Now, we do needs-based scholarship, and so there's any patient who is currently here under a scholarship would receive that same scholarship for any level of care or any clinical services that are provided. So if somebody is here under a 30% scholarship for treatment and the family is coming in for the restructuring program, then that same level of financial assistance would apply to that level of care as well. And so that's something that during the assessment process would be one of the things that would be taken into consideration, and that any sort of a needs assessment would be done to see what sort of financial assistance could be provided to that family prior to the patient even coming in for treatment.
Excellent, Brad. And then we're going to have one more question to wrap up here. Very good question that came in from a participant. How do you define and measure the outcomes of a family system intervention?
So, the best way to kind of identify and define the success of intervening with the family is to really see how the family system is able to articulate and manage the emotions that come up when there is a challenge to the boundaries that are going to be put in place. And so, for example, one of the things that I always get my families to start to buy into is it's not going to be about that one moment where you set firm boundaries with your patient, they realize that things have changed and everything's going to be linear from that point forward, that there's going to be this process of when there's a emotional discomfort that comes up as a result of something that the patient is going through or the family is going through. Is the family system going to go back to doing things the way that they did before, or are they going to be able to have the boundaries not to do that? And so you'll see families who have historically taken a tremendous amount of responsibility for the patient's behavior in the past. After they leave, now there may be a process where the patient struggles and tests those boundaries, but it's really measured by, well, is the family going back to the way that they've dealt with it before by rescuing or enabling and problem solving, or is the family able to reinforce those boundaries, utilize their support system, and not get hooked in by doing the same thing as before? And part of that whole aftercare piece as well is staying connected with these families and continuing to work with them and have them be involved with us so that we're able to continue to see that they're being successful in doing that. And again, having that network of alumni families really is something that's a testament to how much the families actually really do change through the process.
Excellent, Brad. Fantastic. Thank you very, very much for these responses as well and for the presentation. That's going to be all the time we have for questions today. So at this time, I want to pass along some final instructions regarding CE credit. At this time, you can please click on the green CE certificate button located at the bottom of your screen to generate your CE certificate for this event. Please save the certificate to your hard drive first before printing. Please note that you must have viewed today's entire program to qualify for a CE certificate. Should you have any other questions or issues regarding CE certificates, please click the Contact CE Help Desk button at the bottom of your screen to email our help desk. And you can also reach the help desk at webinars@vendomegrp.com. As a registrant for today's event, you will receive an email in the next 24 hours which will provide on-demand access to an archived recording of this presentation for up to 1 year from today's date to share with colleagues. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, we invite you in our audience to view a list of upcoming webinars and to join our community discussion through our Facebook and LinkedIn groups through the links featured in today's resource list. We would also like to ask you to please join us on Thursday, May 2nd, 2013 at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for another Caron Treatment Center's webinar titled Transcending the Double Closet of Wealth and Substance Abuse, presented by Paul Hochmeyer, Senior Clinical Advisor for Caron Renaissance. A link will appear on your screen in a moment for you to register for this program. You can also register for the event by clicking the purple Register for the Next Caron Webinar widget at the bottom right of the screen. I want to thank Brad Sorty again for an excellent presentation. I also would like to thank our sponsor, Caron Treatment Centers, for making today's program possible. Finally, thanks to you and our audience for participating today. We hope you'll join us in the future for another Addiction Professional Behavioral Health Care webinar. This concludes today's presentation. Good afternoon and welcome to today's program titled The Family is the Patient and the Patient is the Family, the Residential Family Restructuring Workshop Recovery Model. I'm Gary Enos, editor of Addiction Professional magazine. Today's program has been sponsored by Caron Treatment Centers. Thank you to our sponsor and to you and our audience for giving us your time and attention. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping details. Each window on your screen can be moved by clicking and dragging, or enlarged and minimized by clicking the icons in the top right corner of each window. Please use the Q&A area below the slides to submit a question at any time during today's presentation. If you cannot see this area, simply click the red Q&A button. To download a copy of today's slides, please click the link in the Resources area in the bottom left of your screen. If you have any technical issues during today's program, please click the yellow Help button to troubleshoot the issue. For those seeking CE credit, certificates will be distributed via the green CE certificate button at the end of today's program, so please wait for further instructions at the conclusion of today's event. You can also tweet during today's presentation via the Twitter widget, clicking on the blue Twitter icon at the bottom of your screen. Simply click the Post and Authorize buttons to log in to your Twitter account and begin sharing at the hashtag